Hello, and this is just another video here in this series about the Utah Legislature. This one is about how bills move throughout the legislature. So I think a lot of us have seen the School Rock, I'm Just a Bill video, and that's for Congress and is similar, but there's a lot of small things that can be kind of hard to understand, but hopefully after these slides in this video, you have a general understanding of how a bill moves throughout the Utah legislature and potentially becomes a law. So this process starts with an idea from literally anyone. It could be a constituent that sent in an idea to their legislator, or a company has an idea or needs something, the school board potentially needs something, or it's just a legislator's idea. And once the legislator has an idea, they'll write it up, brief summary, and they will submit it to the Office of Legislative Research and General Counsel. And what this office will do is they'll do research on it, make sure that the bill isn't already covered in law somewhere already, that this is a bill that can be ran. And if they confirm it is, they'll give it to a drafting attorney, and that drafting attorney will draft the bill. He'll write it up in all its technical and proper form. And once he's done with it, the bill gets numbered, which the way the numbering works is if it's in the Senate, it gets Senate bill and then the number of bill it is. So if there's been 7 Senate bills already numbered, it would be Senate Bill 8 or SB 8. And it's the same for the House, just instead of Senate bill, it's House bill, so it'd be HB 8 or whatever the number is. At around this time, or maybe it's even later on, a fiscal analysis might take place. And what this does is it just looks into how the bill is, if it's taking money, if it's giving money to something, and you can look at the fiscal analysis and see the effects that this bill has fiscally on whatever budgets it is involved in. And so this just helps legislators or constituents see, okay, if this bill's passed, here's what it's going to do to this budget. So once the bill's drafted, maybe it has a fiscal analysis, it's numbered, the bill will then be introduced by the Senate or the House and then sent to the Rules Committee of that respective chamber. So after the bill is introduced and sent to the Rules Committee will then recommend the bill to a standing committee. And so there's a lot of different standing committees that have different kind of responsibilities for the bills they look at. So some examples are the Education Committee, Higher Education Committee, Health and Human Services, Revenue and Tax. And so generally, the Rules Committee will try to assign a bill to a relevant committee. So if it's a bill about first graders in school, it will be sent to the Education Committee. But if it's a bill about a new tax, it'll be sent to the Revenue and Taxation Committee. And both chambers, the House and the Senate, have similar committees, but they can be a little different. But in general, these committees will see these bills come in that are relevant to them, but near the end of the session, there will be some committees with a lot of bills because they've had a lot of bills relevant to them, and they can't really take on more, where there's some that haven't. There will be some committees that haven't had very many bills. And so at the end, sometimes they'll just start distributing bills to committees who don't have very many to try to get bills through the process. So then you might get a tax bill in Health and Human Services, even though it's not relevant to Health and Human Services. And these committees are just made up of different members of the Senate or the House, whichever one it is. And every senator or representative serves on at least 2 to 3 committees. So once it gets to the standing committee, they'll hold an open meeting for the bill, an open meaning that it's open to the public. public can comment on it, and they'll hear testimony in favor and against the bill. So again, this testimony can come from the person who the bill sponsor, the person who is the legislator who's running the bill, people they bring in, experts maybe on the subject matter, or public can, and this last session was they could Zoom in, and they will probably be able to Zoom in and participate virtually again in the future sessions. And then also committee members will ask questions and give their own testimony if they feel. What the committee can do is they can amend, hold, table, substitute, or make a favorable recommendation on the bill. So just go through these. An amendment is a small change. It's under 15 words, just a small change to the bill, adding something or taking something out. Holding the bill means you're not going to vote on it and you're going to hold it. And if a bill's held, it can be put on an agenda for a different committee at a later time, so it can be heard again in the committee. It can be never heard again and just die basically there. It can be returned to rules and just sit there. And then tabling a bill is kind of similar. It's tabled and you say we're going to look at this at a different time, or you can table it. Say there's 5 bills they're looking at on the agenda, on their committee agenda, and your first one, they table it because the bill sponsor is running late. So they table it, go to the second bill, and then they come back to that first bill. A substitute is similar to an amendment. A substitute occurs when there's multiple amendments being made, and so they'll just substitute the whole entire bill. And we'll see some examples of this a little later when I pull up some bill examples, but it will just go from the bill to, let's say it's SB 42. Instead, what if it gets substitute, it'll go to first substitute SB 42. And then the final one is making a favorable recommendation on the bill, which just means that the bill passes out of the committee to the next steps. This is just a simple majority vote. If it gets the majority, it passes out. If it doesn't, the bill basically dies there in committee and it does not pass. So if it is favorably recommended, the bill is then sent back to the House or Senate floor, whichever one it originated in. So if it was introduced in the Senate and it passes Senate committee, it is sent back to the Senate floor to be voted on and debated more. So once the bill is sent back to the Senate or House, it is put on a reading calendar. And this reading calendar has all the bills that have been passed out of committee. And it just goes through from the top to the bottom. The older the bills will be first, and the newer bills will be at the bottom of the calendar. And they just go through this one by one until they get through all of them, basically. And so a little bit of a difference in the House and the Senate. I said in the introduction video, if you watch that, the Senate votes on bills twice. So both the House and the Senate have a first, second, and third reading calendar. The first reading calendar is where they introduce the bill. The second and third readings occur in the Senate. The second reading is just kind of like the introduce. It says, okay, this bill passed, and they don't vote on it. Well, the second reading in the Senate, they'll debate and vote on the bill. And then the third reading, both chambers will debate and vote on the bills. And so, yeah, once this bill comes back up, it's debated, and again, it can be amended or substituted on the House or Senate floor. It can also be circled, and if you circle it, it's basically saying this bill is not ready to be voted on, or the sponsor doesn't want it to be voted on then, and so they'll circle it, and it will stay on the reading calendar, but it'll be circled, and then at almost any time when the Senate or House is going through their reading calendars, the bill sponsor can move to uncircle this bill. and it will be again debated. So if the bill's not circled or if it's uncircled and it's voted on, it just needs a simple majority to pass, which in the House there's 75. Well, in the Senate there's 29 members. So in the House it just needs 38, and in the Senate it needs 15 votes to pass. Or if there's members absent, it could need less than that, just a simple majority of the Senate or representatives present. So if it passes, the bill then moves through the same process in the other chamber. So if you were in the Senate and you move through the committee, both reading calendars, then it goes to the House and it's introduced, goes to a committee, goes through both reading calendars. And something to note here is if let's say you have a Senate bill that goes all the way through, goes over to the House, and the House amends the bill. So they make a change to it. So what happens in that, if it is amended, it moves through the House, then it will come back to the Senate. So normally, if it moved and passed all the way through the House, then it would start the process to going to the governor. But if it's amended, it goes on what's called the concurrence calendar, where the Senate has to concur with the amendment, or the originating chamber has to occur with the amendment or concur with the amendment. And so it will be moved onto the concurrence calendar. I'll show you an example of that in a few minutes. So if the bill passes the other chamber, so it passes both chambers now, it's signed by the Senate President, which is currently President Stuart Adams, and the Speaker of the House, which is Speaker Brad Wilson. And so they're basically just the leaders of the respective chambers, and they'll sign the bill and send it to enrolling, which this enrolling is basically it's just the final version. So they'll print the final version, get it prepared for the governor. The governor, currently Spencer Cox, he can sign the bill, veto the bill, or just let the bill become a law without doing anything. Which, to just let it become a law, he just has to let it sit for 15 days without doing anything to it, without signing it or vetoing it, and then it will become a law. A reason that this happens sometimes is the governor has something that he doesn't want to sign but needs to pass, and so he'll just let it lapse after 15 days and it passes. If the governor vetoes the bill, so he rejects it, what the legislature can do is perform a veto override. So if they really want this bill to pass and turn to law, but it's vetoed, they can say we want to perform a veto override. Sometimes special sessions are called to perform veto overrides. But if it's during the normal session, that bill will just then go on the third reading calendar. And in order to perform this veto override, it needs to pass both houses with a 2/3 majority. So a little different than if it's passing the first time. It has to pass a 2/3 majority, which in the House that's 50 votes, in the Senate that is 20 votes. And so if it passes with those 2/3 majority, then that bill becomes law. So once a bill is a law, whether it's signed or there's a veto override, a successful veto override, the bill will then go into effect 60 days after the session ends, or if it has a specified date within the bill. So now we'll look at a few bills just as examples and see the way they move through the legislature. This is just showing where I'm looking at these bills. This is on the legislative website, le.utah.gov, which you can see in the search bar there. And I clicked where the blue arrow is pointing there on bills. Once you click on that, it takes you to this page with all the sessions over the years, and you can click on whatever session you want to look at a bill, and it will bring up all the bills that were numbered during that session. So it'll have, I think it starts with the House bills, it'll have all of those, and you can find whatever specific one you want, and there's also the Senate bills, obviously. So here's the bill I chose. I selected the 2021 general session and chose SB Senate Bill 197, Trust Deed Amendments. So on this page, you can see the title. Something you can also see is the bill sponsor and the floor sponsor. So the bill sponsor is the legislator who had the idea, who sent the bill to the Office of Legislative Research and General Counsel and had it drafted. And then the floor sponsor is a sponsor for the bill that's in the opposite chamber. So in this particular bill, you have the bill sponsor is Senator Chris Wilson. So he needed a representative to sponsor the bill when it moved through the House. And so he has Representative Dan Johnson as the floor sponsor. And normally that process is just the bill sponsor reaching out to a floor sponsor that they might want and getting somebody who agrees to it, agrees that they'll do it. Maybe the bill sponsor on this particular bill will agree to floor sponsor a different bill for the other member. And once that takes place, then it can continue to move. So if you were to scroll down on this page, you would see a summary of the bill and then also the whole bill itself, the bill text. So this particular one was pretty simple. It was just an amendment to the provisions of trust deeds, particularly I think how trust deeds were mailed. And so this is a pretty simple bill, and if you look at the top here, it has bill text, status, hearings, and debates. We're on bill text. So if you were to click status, we can see how the bill moves through the legislature, which is what we'll look at. So if you look at status, this is what it pulls up. This is just half of the actions of this particular bill. We'll look at the other half on the next slide. But as you can see, you have the dates, the actions, and the locations. So we'll just go through this line by line and take a look at it. So the first action, the bill's numbered but not distributed. So it was drafted, but it hasn't yet been distributed. But just later that day, January 15th, it's distributed. The bill's sent for fiscal input, so it's sent for a fiscal analysis. And then the next day, it is received from legislative research. The Senate receives it because it is a Senate bill, and it has its first reading, so it's introduced in the Senate and sent to the Rules Committee. Then the next day, the 17th, they send it, the Rules Committee chooses a standing committee for it, and they choose Revenue and Tax, and they send it there. Also on the 17th, the fiscal note is finished and is available to view, which if you would like to look at Bill's fiscal notes, they are also on that last page we looked at in the bill text section. So once it moves to a committee, the committee will put it on an agenda and eventually it will come up on the agenda like we talked about before, and that happened in this one on February 22nd. It comes up and it receives a favorable recommendation from the Senate. It wasn't amended or substituted. Or favorable recommendation from the Senate committee, the Revenue and Taxation Committee. And all the way on the right there, you can see the vote. So it passed 6-0-3, which means 6 people voted for it, 0 against, and 3 people were absent. So it passed unanimously. So it is then placed on the second reading calendar on the 22nd, and so then you just have to wait for it to come up on that second reading calendar to be voted on, which happened the next day on the 23rd. And so it was then debated, voted on, and again you can see on the right there it passed 24 for it, 0 against, 5 absent. So again it passed unanimously and moves to the third reading calendar, which then it comes up the next day on the third reading calendar. It's debated and again passed unanimously 29-0-0, so no absent votes, or no, well, if you're absent you don't vote, just no absent senators. It is then sent from the Senate to the House. So this bill was pretty early in the process, or in the session, and so it's moving through the process a lot quicker than some other bills might. But it's moved to the House, and it is introduced in the House on the 24th and sent to the Rules Committee. They send it to the Senate, to the Standing Committee, which is the House Judiciary Committee, and the Judiciary Committee also passes it out with a favorable recommendation. So they send it to the House floor, and that one was also unanimous, 10-4, 0 against, 2 absent. So now we're just continuing. This is the very next thing that happens here. It goes to the House second reading calendar, so it's just read and then sent to the House third reading calendar, where it's debated and voted on. Well, actually, let me stop myself there. It was actually sent back to the Rules Committee from the second reading. So this happens, sometimes there's a problem with the bill, whether it's the fiscal analysis they need to wait for, or there's something that needs to be ironed out. They will be sent back to Rules to do so. And this isn't like it needs an amendment or a substitute or something. This is, they have some like technical problem that they need to get fixed. And so this one was obviously some minor issue because the next day it is released from Rules and put on the third reading calendar. And then on the third reading calendar, it's debated and it is amended. You can see that there on the 5th at 9:38. It was amended and they have a voice vote, which what that means is instead of having a roll call vote where they go through alphabetical order and each senator or representative, in this case representative, votes aye or nay, they instead go, here's an amendment that pretty much everyone agrees on, or maybe everyone doesn't agree on, and they have a voice vote, and they say anyone who votes aye, say aye, and for the most part, you'll get almost everyone saying aye, and then they'll ask for nay votes, and you may get a few nay votes, but if it seems close, if there's like seems like half the people said aye, half the people said nay, then they'll go to a roll call vote. But if there's a voice vote and it says it passed, then it just means they had more aye votes. So then it goes to then it continues during the debate, so it just got amended, and now they have it on third reading and they do a roll call vote. And again, this bill passes unanimously, 70-0 to 5, 5 absent. And so this bill, because it was amended in the House, originating in the Senate, it goes back to the Senate, like we talked about a little bit before, and is placed on a concurrence calendar. And so the next time the Senate goes to the concurrence calendar, which is today, in terms of this, you can see all the third reading and the current concurrence calendar is happening on the same day, and which is the 5th of March. And so the Senate concurs with the House amendment, and they vote on it again to concur, and they vote 24-0-5. So this bill passed unanimously through everything, which is somewhat rare. Most bills do pass, but it is fairly rare to not get an opposing vote at all. So once this happens, the Senate sends it back to the House. The House signs it, or the Speaker of the House signs it, sends it back to the Senate. The Senate President signs it, sends it for enrolling, and then once this bill is enrolled and prepared, it is sent, or it gets the final version, and it's sent to the governor, which you see happens there at the bottom happened on the 11th of March, and then the governor will go through and sign a bunch of bills all at once he has like a batch of them, or maybe veto them, but this one was signed on March 22nd. So we'll look at a couple different bills, a couple more bills here that were more complicated. So this bill is HB 302. We won't get into the text of the bill and what it was really about because it was pretty controversial. We'll just go through its process. So we'll just skip to the first reading on the 3rd of February. So it's introduced and it's sent to a fiscal analysis, or a fiscal analyst to do a fiscal analysis. And after it's introduced, it goes to the Rules Committee. they send it to the House Education Committee. So this House Education Committee substitutes the bill on the 11th of February with a unanimous vote. They substituted the bill, 13 for, 0 against, 2 absent. And because this is substituted in the originating chamber, it wouldn't have to go on the concurrence calendar. But moving along, the House favorably recommends it with a vote of 8 for, 6 against, 1 absent. So it was a very close vote, but it was recommended, so it goes to House second reading, which then moves it to the third reading. And once it gets put on the third reading calendar, and comes up for debate, it was substituted again. You can see on the 17th there at 2:21, substituted from the first substitute to the second substitute using a voice vote. And then they voted on it. And so you can see by the time that this was a fairly complicated bill. The substitute happened at 2:21, and then the vote happened at 2:53. And normally when a bill is debated on, if it's a fairly simple bill, it'll be, maybe less than a minute. But this was a obviously very complicated bill and was debated on for a while. And even before they got to the substitute, it started at 2:10. Oh no, excuse me, that was the 11th 2:20, and so this bill was debated for about 23 minutes, and it was passed out of the House 50-23 to 2, which is significant because this bill was potentially a bill that might be vetoed, and because of that, it needed a 2/3 majority to do a potential veto override. So it got 50 votes, which would be a 2/3 majority. So if they decided in the future to do a veto override, they would probably be confident they could get the 50 votes they needed. But it's sent to the Senate, and we go through here, it's introduced, it's assigned to the Senate Rules Committee, they get the fiscal note, the Senate Rules Committee sends it to the Health and Human Services Committee, and then you can see on the 24th it is held. So the bill is held, they vote to, the Health and Human Services Committee votes to hold the bill, and then this bill never saw the agenda again. It was returned to rules, and eventually the Senate strikes the enacting clause, which just means that the bill is killed. If the enacting clause is struck, it is just dead. And so it is, at the bottom there you can see it is filed for bills not passed. So one last example here. This bill is SB 91, I believe. Let's see, no, SB 61. And this was a bill being run by Senator Sandel. This bill was another fairly complicated issue, not quite as controversial, but it was about electronic billboards and what billboards were allowed to be electronic and what weren't. This became controversial because there were a lot of parties, a lot of sides that had opinions on it, and Senator Sandel was trying to get them to all work together to come to some kind of compromise and get this bill passed. So we'll just skip down here to the 2nd of February. It goes to its Senate Committee, Business and Labor, and it's substituted and then favorably recommended to go back to the Senate floor 6-2 to 1. And here's where it gets a little interesting. On the second reading calendar, you can see on the 8th of February, it is read and then circled. So they read it, debated it maybe a little bit. It doesn't look like they did because it was only 30 seconds. This was likely the Senate sponsor, Senator Sandel, or the bill sponsor, stood up and went, this bill's not quite ready, let's circle it. So it's circled, and then 4 days later on the 12th, it's uncircled, and it is substituted from the first substitute to the second substitute, and then circled again. And then 11 days later, the 23rd, it's uncircled, and then they substitute again from the second to the third, and then it's circled. So this is just going through Senator Sandels working with different parties and getting different substitutes and getting them drafted, and then just changing them, and then circling and uncircling to make sure he can get everybody on board, or try to get everybody on board. So a day later, the 24th, it's uncircled, they make an amendment, and then they debate. And so this again is a longer debate, so it's amended at 11:31 and it's voted on at 11:54. And the reason I wanted to use this one as example is all the circling, but also because it failed. The vote was 12 for, 15 against, 2 absent. So this bill fails, and it's filed for Senate bills that do not pass. So that was a lot there, especially the examples, but hopefully anyone who watched now has a general idea, or skipped through and just found examples or whatever you needed to take from it. But yeah, thank you for watching and listening.